So today I'm going to try and model for you how to approach the unseen poem. So this is a test to see if you remember. How do I start? Well, I look at the connotations of the title. Do you remember what comes next? There's a logical order actually. I'm going to look at the beginning and I'm going to look at the poet's point of view. Can I work that out from the beginning? Next, I'm going to choose the central image. And remember, that's anything that you remember when you shut your eyes. If you can see it, that's the most important part of the poem to you, and you're going to talk about that bit. Don't worry about any of the rest. Next, I'm going to look at the ending, and the ending comes at the end, so that's where I'm going to draw my conclusion. And to get the highest marks, I'm going to try and imagine what the poet's point of view might be. And that's it. It's simple, and it works every time. Well, hopefully I can show you how. So, the poem I've chosen is the right word. So what are the connotations of the title? Well, I start off just by focusing on any word. Here, it's the word right. The poet's trying to be exact, to be correct. So perhaps, I'm going to use tentative language here, this is about finding the truth and being able to say what it is in a way that can be understood. The poet is thinking as a poet. The poet is saying that words matter, so poetry matters. Perhaps it's a plea to be taken seriously. People often ignore poetry and say it's not relevant. And the poet is saying, yes it is. Listen to me, I've got something to say. But there is some ambiguity here because right also means right wing. So perhaps this is a political poem arguing against the way we brand people as terrorists. Is it on the side of those fighting against the West in the Middle East? Perhaps this is asking us to understand the terrorist point of view. And then finally, the right word suggests the whole poem is about the power of words and the power of poetry to change the way we think. And so I'm going to argue that the poet wants to change how we see the world. So next I'm going to go to the beginning. Well, what does that tell me? Outside the door, lurking in the shadows, is a terrorist. Well, what do I make of that? Firstly, I'm going to look at the connotations of the imagery, and I'm going to use the word image because that's going to get me higher marks. Is the terrorist kept out because they're dangerous? Door suggests that the speaker is vulnerable. A wall would be much better defence, wouldn't it? Much better protection. But actually the speaker might feel very vulnerable, as though the terrorist is out to get them and there's no way to keep safe. On the other hand, shadows is associated with death. The terrorist threatens us with death, but at the same time, it may be the terrorist who is associated with death, vulnerable to death themselves. Is the suicide bomber less powerful because they're going to die? We think of them as being hugely dangerous, but actually they're just killing themselves. And then the word lurking suggests the terrorist actually does not have that much power. He has to hide. Out in the open, he'd be destroyed. Moreover, the speaker knows he is there and so can defend himself. Perhaps the speaker feels we are winning the battle against terrorism, and therefore we shouldn't be so afraid of it. Now I'm going to look at the central image. Does that back up the ideas that I came up with earlier? Well, no words can help me now. Just outside the door, lost in shadows, is a child who looks like mine. The speaker seems to have given up on words now, as though there's no way through to the truth through language. Perhaps the press and politicians have made it impossible for us to know when a freedom fighter is a terrorist, when a martyr is a murderer, rather than a warrior. And so the poem is about not being able to use language to uncover the truth anymore. Instead, the poet focuses on a human level, repeating that the enemy is lost. We're encouraged to feel sympathy for the enemy who cannot defeat us. So perhaps we have to understand the terrorist in order to get rid of terrorism. The child looks like mine, and this suggests all children are equally innocent. Bad parents, the West, create bad children, the terrorists. It's therefore up to us, the parents, the West, to change, and so it could be that the poet wants us to change the way we view the enemy. However, whose child is also ambiguous. Darker is probably of Asian heritage. Perhaps the poet is also suggesting that, by not speaking out against terrorism in all its forms, the Asian community is also guilty of creating the terrorist. So it's not just the West that has to change, perhaps the wider community has to change as well. The people where terrorists come from have to change. And similarly, the repetition that the enemy is a child suggests that the terrorist can be educated. We can change terrorism by educating the enemy. But of course first we have to educate ourselves to think differently. And so that brings us to the ending. The child steps in and carefully, at my door, takes off his shoes. Well, the balance between the threat of the terrorist and the need to change his behaviour, I think, is encapsulated in the word carefully. On the one hand, by understanding the terrorist, treating him as our own child, we're carefully changing his behaviour. On the other hand, carefully also suggests a deliberate act. The press have made us used to the phrase shoe bomber, and so perhaps we're still vulnerable to the terrorist attacking us, even as we welcoming him into our own house. The speaker perhaps represents the poet's view and opens my door. He or she has made a decision to trust the terrorist. The emphasis on my suggests that we need to follow suit. We in the West have not tried to understand the enemy. We're still fighting them, even though they're already lost. So perhaps ultimately the image is a plea for us to seek peace instead of war. So, I've summed up in a conclusion what I think the poem's about. Let's go back to the marking criteria and see, have I managed to score the top grades? Well, have I been exploratory? I think I have. I've explored more than one point of view and I've come to a decision at the end. Have I done close analysis? Yes. Every single time I look at a quotation, that's what close analysis is. Every page has been close analysis. Have I looked at the writer's language? Yes, I have. And notice I don't have to write about the structure and I don't have to write the form, but I do have to write about the effect on the reader, and that's why I keep using the word we and us and the West. I'm always letting the examiner know I'm thinking about the effect. And finally, I must have been interpreting all the way through to do that. So there it is. I've managed to get everything in the top band without worrying whether or not I've actually understood the poem. My writing has been trying to understand the poem, and trying to understand has got me the full marks. And you can do the same. That's it.